Hello and a very warm welcome to the channel. Now I got another world history video for you today. So this is from the Bill Wurtz channel. This is the same guy who did a really fun video on the history of the entire planet. It's quite an ambitious topic, the entirety of human civilization. But that I really enjoyed. So I thought I'd see what else he's done, and he's done one on the history of Japan, which I was very excited about because that's a country with an amazing history. So of course it survived Mongol invasions with the help of the odd typhoon. It was largely cut off from the rest of the world until the Meiji Restoration, at which point it modernised incredibly quickly, became the first great power of to emerge in the 18th century, which wasn't either European or European in origin. It has an amazing, fascinating culture, and so I'm really looking forward to this. So let's get into the video.
Japan is an island by the sea filled with volcanoes and it's
Yay!
In the year -1 billion, Japan might not have been here. In the year -40,000, it was here, and you can walk to it, and some people walk to it.
And I am very glad they did, because if they didn't, this would be a really, really short video. So reaction channels of the world, thank you for settlers of Japan.
Then it got warmer, some icebergs melted, it became an island, and now there's lots of trees, because it's warmer. So now there's people on the island. They're basically sort of hanging out in between the mountains, eating nuts off trees, and using the latest technology.
As you do.
Like stones and bowls. Ding dong, it's the outside world, and they have technology from the future, like really good metal and crazy rice farms.
Okay, so I think I said this on the first video from this channel I did. They kind of, it's like what I imagine watching a normal history documentary on drugs would be like. I mean it as a compliment, to be clear. I think it's a really kind of exciting and innovative way of doing history. And clearly lots of people agree because this is a really popular channel. But I don't know if it works the other way around. Like if you watch this on drugs, it then come across as just a completely normal history documentary. It's all like stale, normal. Comment below if you're watching this on drugs. Tell me what your experience is.
Now you can make a lot of rice really, really quickly. That means if you own the farm, you own a lot of food, which is something everybody needs to survive.
Feudalism!
Rice farming and rice kingdoms spread across the land, all the way here. The most important kingdom.
So, okay, why did they stop at that line? There must be some reason why, these rice kingdoms based on rice farming? There must be some reason why the top of Japan wasn't kind of impacted by this new system, and indeed the very little bottom bit. And I really want to know what it is.
Were here, 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 and here. But this one was the most important. Ruled by a heavenly super person, or emperor for short. Knock knock, get the door. It's religion. The new prince wants everyone to try this hot new religion from Biekt. Please try this religion, he said. No, said everybody. Try it, he said. No, said
I mean, that's basically my experience of missionaries. I've come across quite a few in my university town, and it was that was pretty much the conversation we had. Oh no, I was a bit friendlier, to be fair. It wasn't just no. It was. Oh no, they were very nice.
Everybody again quieter this time. And so the religion was put into place,
Buddhism.
and all the rules that came with it. Then the government was taken over by another clique, and they made some reforms, like making the government govern more, and making the government more like China's government, which is a government that governs more. Hi, China, they said. Hi, dipshit, said China. Can you call us something else other than
Yes,
dipshit?
exactly.
Like what?
Please.
Said China. How about sunrise?
So this is an interesting point. I know that certainly in China's early history, Japan was seen as being a sort of a barbaric land, in particular a source of pirates. So I mean, them getting called dipshits is probably roughly historically accurate.
Said Japan. And they stole China's alphabet and wrote a book about themselves.
Ooh.
And then they made lots of poetry and art and another book about themselves. Then they stopped moving the capital every time the emperor died and kept it in one place for a while, right here. And they conquered the north finally.
Yes, finally, the north is no longer random green color. It's now part of the rice agricultural empire, or whatever exactly this is.
A rich hipster named Kukai is bored with modern Buddhism, visits China, and learns a better version, which is more spiritual. Comes back, reinvents the alphabet, and causes art and literature to be great for a long time.
Yeah. And like Japan is famously one of the world centers of culture in a whole series of different ways for art, for literature. So it's kind of interesting to see how that started.
The royal palace turned into such a dream world of art that they really didn't give a shit about running the country.
Does look cool.
Outside the palace, how are you supposed to protect your shit from criminals? Hire a samurai. Everyone started hiring samurai.
So a samurai, I think, is basically like the equivalent of a European knight, essentially, a kind of a local warrior elite who's based off some area of land.
Rich, important people hired. hired samurai. Poor people who could not afford to hire samurai did not hire samurai.
No. Poor people got killed by samurai, I imagine.
Samurai became organized and powerful, more powerful than the government, so they made their own military government. Here, they let the emperor still be emperor, but the shogun is actually in control.
So this is effectively a military coup, by the sound of things.
Breaking news: the Mongols have invaded China.
Ooh, this is bad.
Please respect us, or else we might invade you as well.
Okay.
Like generally, the Mongols would invade you whether you respect them or not. Although there was one very large Middle Eastern state that Genghis Khan invaded first of all because they killed his envoys. So I guess disrespect comes into it, but I think the Mongols are coming for you, like it or not.
Japan. So the Mongols came over, ready for war, and died in a tornado.
Yes.
They tried again and had a nice time fighting with the Japanese, but then died in a tornado. Then the emperor overthrows the shogunate. Then the shogunate overthrows...
So, I mean, I definitely think there are parallels between Japan and Britain in the sense that they're both kind of islands that emerged into significant powers. But were able to develop so much in part because they were separated from water, but by water from the continent. Obviously, the Japanese were protected from 2 Mongol invasions. Britain was protected from, say, the Spanish Armada, Napoleon. I definitely think there's some parallels between Japan and Britain.
Throws him back and moves to Kyoto and makes a new shogunate. And the emperor can still dress like an emperor if he wants. That's fine. Like painting with less colors, collaborative poetry, plays, monkey fun, tea parties, gardening, architecture, flowers. It's time for who's going to be the next shogun. Usually it's the shogun's kid, but the shogun doesn't have a kid, so he tries to get it.
So that the shogun roles become kind of hereditary. I mean, like almost like a monarch, although perhaps sort of slightly less certain.
His brother to quit being a monk and be the next shogun. He says okay, but then the shogun has a kid. So now
Ooh.
Vote now on your...
I mean, this is just going back to European history. This is just hundreds of years of this crap. Who's going to be the next king?
Phones. And everyone voted so hard that the palace caught on fire and burned down. The shogun actually didn't care. He was off somewhere doing poetry. And the whole country broke into pieces.
That is literally the opposite of my life. Off somewhere doing poetry is... You can be pretty much guaranteed that at any given point I will not be off doing poetry.
Everyone is fighting with each other for local power, and it's anybody's game.
Oh, so this is like the Warring States period? Or is that in China? But yeah, you can kind of see how the state has devolved into lots of different localized warlords.
Europe. No, they're not here to take over. They just want to sell some shit, like clocks and guns and cheese. So that's cool, but everyone's still fighting each other for control, now with guns. And wouldn't it be nice to control the capital?
So I believe it was the Dutch who were the first Europeans to arrive. And for quite a long time, they were the only Europeans who were allowed to trade in Japan. Although that's probably later on, so I'm probably getting ahead of myself.
Capital, which right now is puppets, with no one controlling them. This clan is ready to make a run for it, but first they have to trample this smaller clan, which is in the way.
Okay.
Surprise, the smaller clan wins, and the leader of that clan steals the idea of invading the capital and invades the capital. And it goes very well. He's about halfway through conquering Japan when someone who works for him kills him, and then someone else who works for him kills them. That's that guy.
Okay, so generally what I'm taking away from this is never employ anyone because they might kill you. Always be like a sole trader. Never start your own business, and if you do, don't employ anyone. Employ robots.
Guy finishes conquering Japan. And then he confiscated everybody's swords and made some rules.
So is this the first time literally the entirety of Japan, including the very North Island, is unified under one leader? Or was it briefly unified earlier? I'm not totally sure.
And now I'm going to invade Korea, and then hopefully China, he said, and failed, and also died. But before he died, he told these 5 guys to take care of his 5-year-old son until he's old enough to be the next ruler of Japan. And the 5 guys said, yeah, right. It's not going to be this kid. It's going to be one of us, because we're grown-ups. And it's probably going to be this guy, who happens to be way more rich and powerful than the other. A lot of people support him, but a lot of
was that Trump who appeared very briefly?
People support not supporting him. They have a fight, and he wins, and starts a new government right here. And he still lets the emperor dress like an emperor and have very nice things, but don't get confused.
As far as I'm aware, I'm pretty certain there still is an emperor of Japan. I mean, Japan is still a constitutional monarchy, so they have an emperor as head of state, and obviously a prime minister who actually runs the country. So, giving you similar to Spain, the UK, Norway, various others.
This is the new government. And they are very strict. So strict they close the country. No one can leave, no one can come in. Except for the Dutch, if they want to buy and sell shit. But they have to do it right here.
What did the Dutch do right that made them so popular? Like this shogun, just sort of emperor, but happened to like tool people. Or weed.
Now that the entire country was not at war with itself, the population increased a lot. Business increased, schools were built, roads were built, everyone learned to read,
Yay.
books were published, there was poetry, plays, sexy times, witch and Dutch studies. People started to study European science from books they bought from the Dutch. We're talking geography, skeletons, physics, chemistry, astronomy, and maybe even electricity. Over time, the economic and cultural prosperity began to gradually slow down.
What?
Knock knock. It's the United States.
Ooh.
Huge boats.
Things have got
Guns.
real.
Gunboats. Open the country. Stop having it be closed, said the United States. There was really nothing they could do, so they signed a contract that lets the United States, Britain, and Russia visit Japan anytime they want.
Oh, this is really interesting, not just from a Japanese point of view, but from an American point of view. Because this was still in kind of a period of American history where America was, its foreign policy didn't really extend outside the Americas, both North and South America. I mean, there were exceptions. I mean, they crushed the Barbary pirates in North Africa, but generally the United States kept the Americas. And this is the point where it's starting to branch out, and as you can see, it's getting itself involved in Japan and forcing them to open up foreign trade at gunpoint.
Choshu and Satsuma hated this. That sucks, they said. This sucks. And with almost very little outside help, they overthrew the shogunate and somehow made the emperor again and moved him to Edo, which they renamed Eastern Capital. They made a new government, which was a lot more Western. They made a new constitution that was pretty Western, and a military that was pretty Western.
Yes.
And do you know what else is Western? That's right, it's conquering stuff.
So this is what's so fascinating about Japan, how it went from an incredibly closed-off society, was deliberately shutting itself off from the wider world, to a kind of a country which embraced European ways to an almost unparalleled extent, and thus was able to emerge as a great power far earlier than most non-European countries, including the United States as a European country. So if you've ever watched the Tom Cruise movie, The Last Samurai, it's kind of like a good display of this time period. That movie does kind of annoy me a little bit because I think it gets the good guys the wrong way around. I think the samurai were the very sort of traditionalist, ultra reactionary, were essentially holding Japan back, and it was the modernizers who were portrayed as the bad guys in the film, who really lifted Japan out of that era and sort of brought it, created prosperity. But other than that, it is still a really good film, so I recommend it.
So what can we conquer? Korea. They conquer Korea, taking it from its previous owner, China, and then go a little bit further. And Russia rushes in.
So there was there was a war between China and Japan at this point, and this was still at the point where, for Europeans, Japan was not seen as a sort of serious power. I mean, it's very interesting that Japan was never colonized itself. I mean, obviously, especially once America kind of opened it up by force. I don't entirely know why that is. I'd certainly be interested. I mean, I'm sure the fact that they modernized so quickly played an important role and had like a European-style army.
Out of nowhere and says, "Stop! No, you can't take that. We were going to build a railroad through here to try to get some warm water." And Russia builds their railroad, supervised by a shit ton of soldiers. And then when the railroad was done, they downgrade it to a fuck ton. When I say downgrade, I mean upgrade.
Yeah.
Japan says, "Can you maybe chill?" And Russia says, "How about maybe you chill?" Japan is kind of scared of Russia. You'll never guess who's also kind of scared of Russia. Great Britain. So Japan and Great Britain make an alliance together so they can be a little less scared of Russia. Feeling confident, Japan goes to war against Russia, just for a moment.
So Japan started a war with a surprise attack on Port Arthur, which is a big Russian naval base. I find it kind of interesting how the Japanese seem to be the masters of surprise attacks. Like several of their major wars, they start with devastating surprise attacks.
And they both get tired and stop. It's time for World War.
And of course, the Russian-Japanese War was a massive Japanese victory. I mean, which was that was the moment that Japan was being recognised as a proper great power by the other European countries. And of course, the Russian fleet sailed all the way around from St. Petersburg down the southern tip of Russia, and then got sunk in a really vicious naval battle. So yeah, I mean, this is Japan's becoming one of the big boys.
The world is about to have a war because it's the 1900s and weapons are getting crazy, and all these empires are excited to try them out on each other. Meanwhile, Japan has been enjoying conquering stuff and wants more. And the next thing on our list is this part of China and lots of tiny islands. All that stuff belongs to Germany, which just had war declared on it by Britain because Britain was friends with Belgium, which was being trespassed by Germany in order to get to France to kick France's ass because France is friends with Russia, who was getting ready to kick Austria's ass because Austria was getting ready to kick Serbia's ass because someone from Serbia shot the leader of Austria's ass.
I mean, when you put it that way, it starts to sound logical, doesn't it? I've always thought the First World War was a sort of colossal waste of human life and human stupidity. But actually, now I've explained it like this, it all makes sense.
Actually shot in the head. And Britain is currently friends with Japan. So you know what that means. Duh, Japan should take the islands. Which they wanted to do anyway. So they called Britain on the telly to sort of let them know. And then they did it. And they also helped Britain a little here and there with some errands and stuff.
Okay.
Now the war is over. And congratulations, Japan. You technically fought in the war, which means you get to sit at the negotiating table with the big dudes, where they decided who owns what. And yes, Japan gets to keep all that shit they stole from Germany. You also get to join the post-war mega alliance, the League of Nations, whose mission statement is to try not to take over the world. The Great Depression is bad, and Japan's economy is now crappy, but the military is doing just fine, and it invades Manchuria. In the League of Nations, it's like...
So the invasion of Manchuria, which was kind of part of China, is quite interesting in that the Japanese staged attacks on their own railway to justify it. I mean, quite often when countries launch invasions of other countries, they stage attacks. So when the Soviet Union invaded Finland, the Soviets shelled one of their own positions, to killing a couple of their own soldiers to justify it. When the Nazis invaded Poland, they faked an attack on a German radio station using some kind of they got some corpses from somewhere else. I guess the Nazis don't have a problem getting corpses; they're quite good at that. So it's interesting that even when countries are being aggressive, they try and persuade them. They try and portray themselves as being the victim. Putin. So.
Don't do that. If you're the League of Nations, you're not supposed to take over the world.
No.
How about I do anyway? And Japan invaded more and more and more and more of China. It was planning to invade the entire East.
And to be clear, that the Japanese, third time lucky, invasion of China was absolutely brutal. So, I mean, famously, Nanking fell in 1937, and it was just a massacre. Commonly called the Rape of Nanking because of the amount of war crimes that took place. It was a really, really brutal invasion. I mean, China at the time was split between kind of warring nationalist and communist factions, so it wasn't really able to properly fight the Japanese.
You've got mail.
It's from Germany, the new leader of Germany. He has a cool mustache and he's trying to take over the world with his friends. This also got forwarded to Italy. They all decided to be friends because they had so much in common. It's time for World War II. Germany is invading the neighbors. Then they invade the neighbors' neighbors. Then the neighbors' neighbors' neighbors, who happen to be Britain, said, holy shit. And the United States started helping Britain because they are good friends. And started not helping Japan because they're friends and our friends are not friends. Plus they're not invading the entire ocean. The United States is also working on a large, very huge bomb. Bigger than any other bomb. Ever. Just in case.
So, I mean, there's always been this debate about why Japan entered the war. I mean, clearly, America started turning against Japan. For quite understandably, Japan was becoming very aggressive and imperialistic, and it started becoming under a lot more sanctions and economic pressure. And Japan felt it kind of had to expand, or at least that's what the imperialists in Japan argued. It had to expand to maintain raw materials, now especially oil and rubber, now that it had lost control of American supplies. But I mean, of course, at the time, Japan was a ruthlessly imperialistic country.
But they still haven't joined the war. War looks bad on TV, and the United States is really starting to care about their image. But then Japan spits on them in Hawaii and challenges them to war. And they say yes. And then Germany, as a symbol of friendship, declares war on the United States also. So the United States goes to war in Europe, and they help the gang.
I genuinely wonder what would have happened if Germany hadn't declared war on the United States. I assume that by this point Roosevelt was so dedicated to the war, and obviously he was already very heavily supporting the UK and its allies in Europe via kind of lease lends and all that stuff. I assume that America probably would have got involved in Europe anyway, but it is really weird that Hitler was the one that declared war, not Roosevelt. And also Japan didn't return the favour. Japan didn't return the favour and declare war on the USSR. The USSR and Japan didn't go to war until right at the end of 1945. It was right at the end of the war.
Chase Germany back into Germany, and they also start chasing Japan back into Japan.
Yes.
And they haven't used the bomb yet, and are curious to see if it works.
Obviously, this is America's island hopping campaign. So Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the Philippines. I mean, at the same time, I mean, the Japan had invaded the Dutch East Indies, invaded territory the French had, sort of Indochina, invaded territory the British had, Burma, Malaysia. I mean, certainly in some of these places, originally Japan was welcomed as liberators from kind of the European colonialists. But so, for example, in Vietnam, but their behaviour was so awful that they then started turning the locals against them, and started facing resistance movements as well. So, I mean, they were bad enough that they made the Europeans look, I mean, not good, but not so bad by contrast in terms of where they treat civilians.
So they drop it on Japan.
Cities that exist. Oh, that's dark. That's dark. My understanding is that the Japanese were told that if they didn't surrender, Tokyo would be next. And at the same time, this is when the Soviet Union finally entered the war, invading Korea, creating what is now North Korea. So yeah, you can see the Japanese are pretty screwed. Ooh. Yeah, that's pretty tragic.
The United States installed a new government, inspired by the United States government, with just the right ingredients.
And it's crazy how successful this was. So, like, we think of like regime change operations, and often regime changes go pretty badly. I can think of examples where they go badly, but Germany, Japan, and Italy were all turned into liberal democracies essentially at the end of the Second World War by American pressure, Western Allies pressure, and all of them are still liberal democracies to today. So yeah, it's really impressive what they achieved.
For a post-war economic miracle.
Hey!
And Japan starts making TVs, VCRs, automobiles, and camcorders as fast as they can, and also better than everybody else.
I mean, there was a period where people were genuinely, I mean, it was never very realistic, but Japan's economy was just exploded so much in sort of the 70s, 80s. Some people thought it might even overtake America's. Obviously, that didn't happen, and Japan sort of then went on to have a bit of a stagnation.
Else. They get rich, and the economy goes wild, and then the miracle wears off.
Yes.
It's still pretty cool, I guess.
Ha! Okay. That's that was very interesting. I mean, we kind of I was expecting a little bit more on Japan's modern history. So I mean, Japan is definitely, because for a very long time after World War II, Japan completely demilitarized. It's starting to militarize a bit more now. Obviously, it's scared of kind of expansionism from China or aggression from China. I mean, Japan has a big problem with a demographic problem. Its population's starting to fall. It has a big problem maintaining its birth rates. But at the same time, it's still a very rich country, and of course, it's very advanced in robotics and AI. So hey, maybe they don't need people. But no, that was really good. Unfortunately, this channel's only got 2 videos, which is annoying because I think they're really well done. But yeah, so I hope to see you next time, and subscribe, like, comment, etc. All that stuff I'm supposed to say at the end of every video. Thanks.